Good evening, dear participants, and welcome back to Women's Memoir Writing Club. In today's session, we will talk about 10 commandments of memoir writing. This instructional session is a masterclass based on the guidelines provided by David Sedaris, a best-selling memoir author and a master of memoir writing. So stay with us and learn 10 commandments of memoir writing that will make your memoirs even more suspenseful. So today we will discuss important tips from David Sedaris, then we will read and analyze creative pieces from workshop participants. And of course you will have a written assignment assigned at the end of the lesson. Okay, David Sedaris is a best-selling author, novelist, memoir writer, and he provides 10 most important tips in order to write great memoirs. To start with, you have to know that writing a memoir based on your own experience requires a good overarching story, but in order to make an impression on the reader from the page 1, you have to be able to engage the reader from the very first word. So when you write a memoir, begin with a dramatic hook that makes the reader want more. If you can hold the reader's attention from the top, they will stick with you through the whole book. As an example, Elizabeth Gilbert's memoir, Eat, Pray, Love. It starts with an intimate moment. So she's sitting across from a much younger Italian man, wishing he would kiss her. So this book documents her life after a devastating divorce and a heartbreak. But she leaves the backstory and a bad things for later and kicks off her globe-trotting tale of self-discovery with a moment that grabs the reader's attention. So it's very important to choose your very first words wisely. Next tip, build trust with the reader. So a memoir is a deeply personal non-fiction book that you will be sharing with total strangers. So from the beginning, tell your story as if you are sharing a secret with the reader that you have never told anyone else. This approach makes the reader a confidante and builds trust from the start. So you have to be intimate with the reader. Make sure that reader is receiving something secretive, something very hidden from you. Tip number 3, bring emotions out of the reader. Memoir writing is nothing but expressing emotions. A memoir should also approach a story with the human element in mind and evoke emotion in the reader. So you have to write your first pages from the heart and try to use the language that will resonate with people on an emotional level. Here, using sensory details will help you. Next tip, lead with the laugh. Well, sometimes we think that memoirs are usually sad stories. These are our trials and triumphs, our experiences that are usually very serious. But memoir can be comic as well. Reading a memoir is impossible to do without belly laughing, even when he relives some of the unhappiest moments in his childhood. So even if your memoir focuses on a darker story, try leading with a humor. So if you add humor, the reader will respond to with range of emotions, and you won't want to feel down throughout the entire book. So humor is a must-have component of memoir writing. Next tip, open with a dramatic moment. So you have to choose a dramatic moment from the start of your memoir. Your first sentence, your opening scene, is the most important part of the work. You can revisit the events in more detail later, but sharing an exciting glimpse of what's to come can keep the reader engaged. Think of a pivotal turning point later in the story that you can tease with a powerful opening. Remember to heighten the drama through the exposition. Here, a good example again can be Elizabeth Gilbert's memoir. So the opening gives a good glimpse of what's gonna happen in the memoir. That's why you have to make your opening as dramatic as possible. David Sedaris suggests the next tip. Think like a fiction writer. A memoir is a true story of your life, but that's a work of art, so it should have some elements of fiction, but it should also incorporate the structural elements that make fiction compelling. You should have your exposition, should have your plot, should have your imagination. So establishing yourself as the main character, building out the setting, planning the source of conflict, teasing out the central theme, those are must-haves of memoir writing. Create a story structure with a strong opening, middle, and end to string out a story that reader knows how to follow. So, even if you are writing a realistic story about your life, you have to learn how to think like a fiction writer. Add details that did not exist, but will show the true roots of your story. Tip number 8. Keep it relevant. So when you tell someone else a story face to face, it's centered around one event. Take the same approach with your personal memoir from the start. So in our previous sessions, we called it stick to one central idea, central theme, right? So an autobiography captures the whole life, lots of events taking place from the start till the end. But memoirs have a more narrow scope. So you have to center your ideas around one time period or a theme from your life. There are a million little details and life experiences that you have never imagined that would become a very good memoir. So the reader doesn't need to know that what you wrote in your book is, let's say, what do you know is irrelevant. The reader needs to feel that. For example, what you wore to your high school prom, unless event is relevant to your book. So it means do not include too many details. Just in order to give lots of descriptions, do not include redundant details. A famous Russian writer Chekhov once said, if you add a detail of gun in your story, make sure that in the next scene this gun is used. So if you add a detail to your memoir, make sure that it makes sense that this detail will be used sometime in your story. So, next tip. Write for the reader as well as for yourself. So writing your memoir is therapeutic. We have talked about it from the beginning, right? It's the way of healing, it's about self-expression, so it deals about you more than about readers. So as you share your personal stories, remember that you have an audience. Don't exclusively look inward when you write. Always keep the reader in mind. Make sure that your personal narrative is a compelling story. For a great example, you can read Frank McCourt's memoir, Angela's Ashes. I think it was in the list of recommended memoirs from our first session, right? So this memoir recounts his impoverished upbringing in New York and Ireland, his recollections, an alcoholic father and a mother desperate to keep her family together, never feel self-serving, and instead they invite the reader into the trauma of his youth. So make sure that you are talking with reader, not with yourself. So pre-last tip that David Sedaris thinks that is important, that's to be honest. So in writing a memoir, you are promising the reader that what you are telling them is an honest account of your own life from your own perspective. Censoring yourself is easy if you are retelling stories that involve other people and family members who may remember things differently. So stay true to your narrative while respecting their right to privacy. For instance, maybe you change their names or use initials. Only you can decide what stays and what goes. But remember to deliver an honest story because memoirs are nothing, but they are your true story. They are the accounts of your life. Last but not the least, write the opening list. So actually when we start writing, we start the first lines, then we write what happened, and then we finish the story. But actually when you finish the story, come back to your first lines, come back to your opening. So when you sit down to write, the perfect opening might be elusive. It would be difficult to catch. So if there is a writer's block involved, then you have to remember that you don't need to write in chronological order. Start writing the part of the story that most inspires you, that comes to you. And then you can always come back to the beginning, and then you can redesign your opening. Remember, opening is the most important part, so you have to edit and work on it as many times as it needs to be. So, these are 10 commandments recommended by David Sedaris, award-winning memoir writer. You can write his more tips through his masterclass website, and you will learn lots of tips regarding memoir writing. Now, the good news is most of the participants, when they are writing memoirs, they are applying those techniques unconsciously. So even though they did not know that there is such a tip that memoir should be written in this way, so subconsciously they could apply those tips in their writings. Now I'm going to analyze and read some of the pieces from our workshop participants' works and try to think what tips are used here. So what are the strengths of these pieces as recommended by David Sedaris? So for today's session, I have taken pieces from Dilrubos story. So let's read it together and try to find out what are the strengths of this memoir. Something between running and speed walking. I reached the building 6. Now we're left the stairs and to find the auditorium 606. Almost silent corridor of the 6th floor was empty. Just the hum of lecturers oozing through the cracks of door frames. Conscious of the noise of my heels to make I was now tiptoeing, my heels barely touching the marbled floor. So take a look at this piece. And in our Telegram group, under the comments of this video, try to identify as many strengths as you can see here. So this piece is a very descriptive piece, and it's actually an opening line of Dilrubos' memoir. What I want you to do is to analyze it and find the strengths, as many strengths as you can find, based on the recommendations of today's sessions and also sessions provided thus far. It's a very good activity. By doing this activity, you will learn how to strengthen your own writing. Next piece comes from the same source, from the same writer. So, the close breath of a person behind me distracted my thought. Although in a crowded bus, I could identify it being too close. Then a light touch on my right thigh. I let slide my shoulder back to my side, tried to push its pointy edge behind to create a bit of buffer zone. It didn't work. I was now quite leaning on an elderly person sitting in front of me, my hand up on the bar stretched and curved, holding my whole body so I don't collapse on him. I felt another touch. It was getting more obvious. There are 3 more stops, 9 more traffic lights. until my destination. My cheeks very growing hot from shame or rage. I couldn't tell. Within seconds, I found myself getting off at the next stop. So that is a culmination point in Dilrabos' memoir. So in this point, you can see the main problem. First of all, try to identify what is the problem here. What is the central theme? What is the issue the author is addressing to? And also try to find the strengths of this piece. So, as it's a culmination point or it's the crisis point of this memoir, what are the strengths that crisis parts can have? Try to identify as many strengths as you can. And when you are ready, make sure that you share your thoughts in the group. It's a group discussion. You have to take part very actively because by doing so, you will learn a lot. After you have analyzed and found the strengths of those two pieces, you have an assignment to do till next week. Well, this month we have introduced the topics of women empowerment, healing, and freedom memoirs. And some of you are still working on some of those topics. So this week, I really want to receive some of the edited, polished versions of your memoirs. So no new topic will be introduced this week. Instead, you have to make sure that you finish the proofreading and editing processes of your previous memoirs, and then post them on the Wix blog. We will visit your Wix blogs, read your memoirs, and leave comments. Keep writing. Thank you for being with us.